Welcome to NOAA Live Alaska. My name is Lisa Hebruki-Raring, and I'm going to be moderating today's webinar. This series is the collaborative effort by NOAA Fisheries Alaska Fisheries Science Center, where I work, NOAA's Alaska Regional Collaboration Network, and NOAA's National Weather Service. This webinar series is designed to help you get to know NOAA's work in Alaska and how we connect and work with your communities. NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, studies the ocean and the atmosphere and where the two meet, from weather to ocean to the animals that live around us. All of our speakers work for some part of NOAA or work in partnership with NOAA. We hope this gives you a sneak peek at different career paths that you might be interested in. Today, we're introducing you to Erin Moreland, Cynthia Christman, and Heather Ziel, who work for the NOAA Fisheries Alaska Fisheries Science Center in Seattle, Washington. While we'll be talking about NOAA's role in research and stewardship, we want to recognize that we are all coming to you from the traditional lands of Native communities who have substantial traditional and local knowledge and much to share with us. In Alaska, Erin, Cynthia, and Heather's program does work in the Beaufort, Chukchi, and Bering Seas, which are the traditional home waters of the Inupiat, Yupiat, and Siberian Yupiat people. Their program also does collaborative work on the Russian side of the Bering Strait, which is the traditional lands of the Chukchi and Chuban people. We would also like to acknowledge that Erin, Cynthia, and Heather are presenting from, and we're hosting this webinar from, the traditional lands of the First People of Seattle, the Duwamish people, past and present. A few guidelines before I hand you over to our speakers. You're all muted because we have a lot of people on the line and we want to make sure everyone can hear our speaker. However, there's a box where you can write questions. We encourage you to ask them as we go, and my colleague Chris Beyer and I will be keeping track of questions for Erin, Cynthia, and Heather behind the scenes. They'll stop every now and again and answer a few questions. We may not get to all of our questions, but we'll try to answer as many as we can. All right, I'll hand it over to Erin, Cynthia, and Heather to introduce themselves.
Hi. I'm getting some feedback. Hello, okay. My name is Erin, and I grew up in Los Angeles, but, oh, let me change to our, all right, there we go. I grew up in Los Angeles. My mom was an elementary school teacher, and she used to take me to the creek by our house to catch pollywogs for her classroom, and I loved being outside. I particularly loved going to the beach and being in the ocean. And as I learned more about science, I became really fascinated with mammalian adaptations to living in the sea. And so when I went to college, I made sure that I could study marine mammals, and I did that at Humboldt State University. And after that, I got a degree in zoology, and then I went on to get a master's degree in environmental science from Western Washington University. And while I've been working for NOAA, I've enjoyed getting to work with seals both in Hawaii and in the Arctic. And now I'm a mom myself, and I make sure that I get my kids into the water, even though it's cold up here in Washington, but I want them to also feel connected to the sea. And here's Heather.
Hi, everybody. My name is Heather Ziel, and I also work with Erin and Cynthia. And I guess some of the ways that I got into working in biology and studying animals is that I always loved being outside and playing outside when I was a kid. And some of my favorite times were when my family would go on camping and rafting trips, and we would get to spend the entire day outside, and even nights, like in this picture up here, where we got to sleep outside on one of these rafting trips. We got to sleep outside next to the river on the sand with no tents. And I thought that was just the best. So then I went to school at UC Santa Cruz, and I knew I wanted to study biology, but I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. And then I took a class that I really loved. And in this class, we would go to the beach and we would just observe and watch elephant seals. And so we would observe them and record their behaviors. We'd just spend all day on the bluff watching them in their environment and how they acted in their habitat. So after that class, I was totally hooked on doing field work, which is what the class introduced me to, where you go out and work with plants or animals you're working with in their habitat, and you get to study them in the environment where they're living and growing. So when after Santa Cruz, I went to school at University of Maine, and then I spent a few years studying seabirds out on islands in Maine and Massachusetts. So then I guess all of those sort of various experiences have led me to working with ice seals in Alaska with Cynthia and Erin. And now here is Cynthia.
Hi, everyone. My name is Cynthia, and I've been excited about marine life since I was little. I was born on the East Coast in Maryland State, where I spent a lot of time exploring the Atlantic Ocean. And then I went to college on the West Coast in Northern California, and like Erin, at Humboldt State University, where I explored the Pacific Ocean and then also earned a degree in marine biology and zoology. And then eventually I wound up working in Alaska on various seal and also whale projects in the Arctic Ocean. And I'm going to quickly introduce our assistant today as well. Her name is Freya, and she will be helping us with a demo later. And she absolutely loves everything about the water, from beaches and rivers to even the tiniest, dirtiest mud puddle. Okay, I'm going to kick us off here with an introduction to the seal species that we study. So there are 4 species of ice seals that live in Alaska, and maybe you've heard of some of them. So Lisa, can we ask our viewers for a few guesses?
So for those of you who are in our audience, we're going to be talking about 4 different species of seals that live on the ice. And I was wondering whether any of you guys might know what some of these species are. So if you have any guesses about what kinds of seals might live on the ice, please put them into your question box and we'll see what kind of guesses we have. So let's see. We are not getting a lot of guesses right now, but actually Tatiana was saying maybe elephant seals. Clary is from Nome, so she knows. She's saying spotted seals. Amy is saying, oh, actually Alden is saying elephant seal or harp seal. Amanda is saying ringed seal. Michaela is saying harp seals. Richard is saying ring seals with a question mark. Carol is saying lion and elephant. So maybe that's sea lion and elephant seal. Jillian is saying leopard seals. Now we're getting into some far-fetched places here. But yeah, there's a lot of people know a lot of different kinds of seals. We have leopard seals, harp seals, hooded and harp seals from Christman. I think we have some Canadians on the line here. Teresa says bearded seals. And Peter says ribbon seals. Jasper says spotted seal. Carrie is saying ribbon seals. So, and then Mary says harbor seal. So we've got a lot of different guesses here, and I was wondering whether you could help us out.
Yeah, that's great. Those are all great answers. And so the 4 species that we study that live around Alaska are bearded, ringed, spotted, and ribbon seals. So how do we know what species we're looking at? Well, fortunately, they all have pretty unique physical characteristics. Bearded seals are named for their bushy whiskers, which makes them look like they've got a big beard. And they have relatively small heads compared to large torpedo-shaped bodies. And they also have squared-off front flippers. And ring seals, on the other hand, they have dark fur, or what we call pelage, and they have light rings on their back and sides. They also have like a cat-like face or snout, and they have really sharp claws, which they use to dig breathing holes in the ice, and also snow caves where they give birth to their pups. And spotted seals, you can probably guess, have spotted fur coats. And they look really similar to harbor seals, if you're familiar with harbor seals. But spotted and harbor seals are actually 2 different species. And then finally, we have ribbon seals. And they have really dark coats with these striking white ribbons around their neck and their front flippers and their hips. So if we compare the length, weight, and lifespan of these 4 species, we can see that bearded seals are the largest, and they can get up to 8 feet. And for comparison here, for reference, a bike is about 6 feet in length. And they can get up to 800 pounds. And again, for reference here, if we take a large dog, like say a bloodhound, that would be 100 pounds. It would take 8 large dogs to weigh what a bearded seal weighs. And they live to be about 25 years old. And ring seals, on the other hand, they're the smallest of the ice seal species that we study. And they're about 4 feet, 150 pounds, and can live up to 30 years old. Now, spotted seals are somewhere in between the other 2 species. They're about 5 feet and can get up to 250 pounds and live to be about 35 years old. And then finally, ribbon seals are a bit bigger than spotted seals at 6 feet, 330 pounds, and they can live about 30 years old. So now that we know how to identify them, where do these seals live? Well, let's look at range maps for each of these. So this is a map that's centered over the North Pole, looking down. So you can see my cursor here. We've got Russia over here, Canada, and the United States. And I placed a white star over Alaska for reference. So we can see that bearded seals, they have what we call a circumpolar distribution. And if we break down that word, circumpolar, circum means circle around, and polar is the region or location. So these seals live around the polar region, and they have a population of about 500,000 worldwide. Ring seals, they also have a circumpolar distribution, and they range throughout the Arctic basin and southward into adjacent seas. But there are actually 2 landlocked populations that live in lakes in Russia and Finland. And there's about 300,000 in the Alaska stock. Spotted seals are distributed across the continental shelf of the Beaufort, Chukchi, and Bering Seas, and then they extend south over into the Sea of Japan and the Yellow Sea. And then ribbon seals are found in the southern seas of the Arctic Ocean and into the North Pacific Ocean, where they most commonly occur in the Bering Sea and the Sea of Okhotsk. So now we know what ice seals look like and where they live, but what do they eat? Well, bearded seals are primarily benthic feeders, and that means they feed on or near the seafloor. So they dig in the mud and they eat things like shrimp and crabs and clams. Whereas ringed, spotted, and ribbon seals, they feed throughout the water column. So they eat a variety of fishes, and cephalopods or squids or octopus, and crustaceans. And seals like to talk. They're very vocal. And we can capture the sounds that they make underwater using a hydrophone, and then display that on what we call a spectrogram, which is just a visual representation of frequencies over time. So let's listen to a bearded seal that's vocalizing. Wow, that is so cool. Okay, and I've got a clip of a ribbon seal here as well. Let's take a listen to what a ribbon seal sounds like vocalizing. And actually, seals aren't the only thing that make noise in the ocean. Sea ice in their habitat makes sound as well. And so we find that clip. Okay, those are such cool sounds. And I think we're going to stop for some questions.
Great. We did have a couple questions about, David was wondering how much more does a male seal weigh than a female on average? And I guess that would be a question for each of the species.
Yeah, that's a great question. Males can be a little bit, usually a little bit heavier than the females, although bearded seals, actually the females tend to be a little bit larger and heavier than the males do.
And then Julia was wondering, why do the 4 types of seals vocalize differently? So when they make sounds underwater, why do they sound different? Do they have different languages?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, it's like I have a certain voice and Erin has a certain voice and so does Heather. And so they all communicate a little bit differently. It's sort of like having a different voice.
And then we had a couple of questions about the sea ice. So KJ was wondering, how does the sea ice make sound? And Jillian was wondering, why does it sound like the sea ice is singing?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, sea ice is interesting. So sea ice is actually moving in the ocean, and as it starts to break up in the spring, the flows kind of break up and move past each other, and it makes noise when the flows break up and move. And yeah, they're just really unusual noises that you wouldn't expect.
So one of the questions that we also get is, why do you think that seals make those noises underwater? I mean, the bearded seals sounded like torpedoes. It sounded like they call for quite a long time. So why are they calling underwater?
Yeah, yeah, it's really interesting. So bearded seals, they can vocalize during the breeding period to call for females or attract females. So that's one of the reasons that they vocalize. And another might just be communicating a territory that they have to other seals in the water.
Great. And then we had a couple of questions about ribbon seals. Amy was wondering why the ribbon seals have such an unusual pattern on their bodies.
Yeah, that's great. I don't know why they have such an unusual fur pattern, but they are pretty striking, and it is interesting that they're pretty dark and have these white ribbons. And you know, ribbon seals actually tend to be more pelagic than, so we talked about benthic being on the bottom, and then pelagic is more out in the water column. Ribbon seals tend to be more pelagic during the open water season, or when ice recedes north, and it might be, you know, that darker pattern is useful in the open water, and then the white ribbons help when there's sea ice cover in their habitat.
Sounds good. Well, we do have a lot more questions, but I know that you guys have a lot more information to cover. So maybe we'll go on to the next section and we'll hold all the other questions for now.
Okay, thanks, Lisa. I will turn it over to Erin.
All right, thanks, Cynthia.
as you just learned from Cynthia, ice-associated seals are really broadly distributed throughout the Arctic and subarctic ice-covered waters. And so part of our job is to find out how many there are. And the way we do that is to fly in airplanes above the sea ice and count the animals that are out of the water and up on the ice to rest or have their pups. And they do that in the spring. So we conduct these aerial surveys in the spring. And we fly over the entire frozen sea, as much of it as we can cover, to count seals. And we tend to try to work with scientists in other countries to do a good job at that. So in 2016, we were trying to figure out how many seals are in the Chukchi Sea. And you're looking at the Chukchi Sea here. And so that black line running down the center of the map is the border between the United States, the state of Alaska, and Russia. And as you can imagine, animals don't care much for our political boundaries. And so we worked really closely with Russian scientists so that we could fly the same type of survey and help come up with a really good estimate of the seals in US waters, but also in the whole Chukchi Sea. In 2016, we did this. And so you can see on the right side of the map, the blue lines are the tracks that our airplanes flew, and the red are the tracks that the Russian airplane flew. And we use cameras in our planes to help us find seals on ice, because when we just look out the window, we have to fly really low, close to the ice, and pretty slow. So flying a little bit higher and faster allows us to get this really good coverage that you can see here. And during this survey, we were looking for bearded seals, ringed seals, and polar bears. So here's an example picture of what we collect from the airplane. And there is actually a seal on the ice in this picture. We fly at 1,000 feet, so this picture was taken at 1,000 feet, looking down at the sea ice. And it's really hard to find a seal in this picture, and I'm gonna help you out a little bit. It's right there, and here it is zoomed in. It's a little white coat pup. And we actually collect millions of images over the course of all of these surveys, and it's really hard to find these seals that are just kind of spread out, scattered across the ice. So how are we gonna find seals on the sea ice in a million images? And the approach that we've been taking to do this is to use a thermal camera. And all mammals emit energy. They emit thermal radiation in the form of heat. And even though they have, all these animals that have adapted for living in the Arctic have, warm blubber, really warm coats like polar bears, they still emit thermal radiation, and we can fly over them with our little camera in our little airplane and get thermal pictures that actually show us the temperature of the ice and the temperature of the animal. So we actually have a thermal camera set up here today so we can show you what they do. And before I give control over to that, I'm going to show you here that I have a glass vase and a pair of reading glasses. And I'm going to show you these in the camera, but you're not going to be able to see that they're anyway, it's kind of like a magic trick. Just remember that I showed these to you, okay? All right, now I'm going to send control over to the thermal camera. Give me 2 seconds to do that.
Okay, so we can't hear you guys. You might be muted, but we are seeing Freya, I think, in the bottom of the screen.
Okay, we've got it back. 1 second. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you fine.
Okay. All right, so let's see. We've got Freya. here. She's a little distracted. Okay, there's our Freya. All right, so you're looking at a thermal image of Freya live, and in your screen, in your view, you should be able to see a bar on the right side that shows you temperature. So you can see that the purple and blue colors are the cooler colors in the room. So down around 56 degrees is the coldest temperature it's measuring, and all the way up to 96 degrees in the bright white. So that's going to be Freya's eyes, measuring around 95 degrees. Now, if I show you some ice, this is actually an iced coffee. You can see that it is much colder. So you can see Freya's not as interested in coffee, I guess, but you can see that this temperature is down in the 30s of my ice. Now, if we ask Freya to put on a pair of these same reading glasses I showed you, good girl. All right, you can see that those clear reading glasses actually block the camera's ability to measure the temperature of her eyes. So her eyes, the glass is showing up around 70 degrees instead of that 95 degrees we know is underneath them. And the same thing happens with my iced coffee and this vase. So this is the vase that I showed you. And when I drop my ice, oops, and here's my iced coffee. And if I put my iced coffee down into the glass vase, you can no longer measure the temperature of that. So these cameras are really great, but they cannot see through glass. And that is important when you want to mount them in an airplane. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and thank you, Freya, for your incredible participation here. I'm going to send this back. All right. So this is our airplane that we mount these cameras in. And you can see in the lower left picture, those are our thermal cameras and color cameras mounted in an open hole in the floor of the airplane. And then on the right, you can see Cynthia, mask-free, pre-COVID, running all of the computers that control all of the cameras. And let's see, so for this is a closer look at our cameras. And this top row cameras, the little red ones, these are our color cameras. And they produce these expected images of the sea ice below. And these are our thermal cameras. And they produce, instead of those bright rainbow colors that you saw in our live demo with Freya, we actually just use a grayscale. So the darker the gray, the colder the temperature, and the whiter, the lighter, the hotter. So in this one, you can see that we have what we call a hot spot. So we have a nice, consistently cool image with something warm in it. And if you look in the color image, it's pretty small, but it's also a lot of really jumbled ice, which is particularly tricky when you're trying to find an animal. So there's actually a polar bear in that image. And the reason we found it was because of that hot spot that it made in the thermal camera. And even in this zoomed in picture, it can be tricky to find that polar bear. They're really well camouflaged. So here's another example where we have a thermal image on the right and a color image on the left. And you can see there's two really clear hot spots, and they map easily in the color image to two seals on the ice. And we can zoom in and see a small head and a big body. And so we know what species of seal that is. And so those are going to be bearded seals. All right. If anybody has any questions, I think we have some time to do that before the next section.
Yeah, actually, we had a question about the thermal imaging. Richard was wondering, is the thermal imaging more effective in a certain time of year? Erin, are you hearing me? Yeah. Oops. Seems like
Sorry, Lee.
we're having. Go ahead.
Sorry, we had the volume off, so we can hear you now.
Okay. So yeah, so Richard was asking, is thermal imaging more effective at a certain time of year?
Well, I think in this environment, it's pretty effective because we have such an extreme contrast in temperature between the seals and the ice. I know that there is some use of thermal cameras to find whale blows in warmer, in areas where you don't have quite the same extreme fluctuation in temperatures. So it can be used in different environments around the year.
Great. And then Jay was wondering, why do you have 3 cameras instead of 1 of each?
Ooh, that's a good question. So we use 3, so each pair overlaps, and it's the footprint that it takes, the picture that it takes on the ground. So it allows us to cover more ground. So we basically have like 3 swaths of imagery as we fly along. So using that setup, we basically can cover the same area that we'd be able to cover if we were looking out the window at a lower altitude.
Great. And then Teresa, or actually Jeremiah was wondering, he wanted to confirm, are you using computers to lay the color images over the thermal images, or do you just look at them side by side?
Yes, that's a great question. When we started doing this, we definitely we looked at them kind of independently. And now we have computer software that overlays them right over each other. And we're also applying machine learning models to detect animals in the imagery, the thermal and the color.
And then one question that went back to Cynthia's section, there were a couple of people, Carol and a couple of other people, who were wondering whether any of the seals that we're talking about here, any of the 4 species, are on the endangered species list.
Yes, the ring seal is listed as threatened, I believe. And bearded is also listed as threatened.
Okay. And then there's Kaylin was wondering, do different species of seals talk to each other? And if they do, how do they know what they're saying?
Oh, that is such a great question. I do not know the answer to that. But we do have a whole crew of people at our lab that listen to the sounds of the Arctic Ocean all around the year. So they pull out sounds from whales and seals, and they are working really hard at trying to understand acoustics in the ocean.
Great. Well, I know we have a lot more to go through, so maybe we'll hold questions for there and then go on to Heather's section.
Sounds good. All right, I'll hand it over to Heather.
Hey, everybody. Okay, so Erin just told you about how we use aerial surveys to study seals with all the plane and the really sophisticated and cool thermal cameras and digital cameras. And with all of that equipment, we can study the seals over a huge area of their range. So I'm going to talk, though, about a different way that we study seals in our program, and that is when we conduct field work with them. So like I was talking about in my introduction, field work is where you go up to where the seals or plants or whatever you're studying, where they live, and study them in their environment and in their habitat. So as you also learned from Cynthia and Erin, these seals that we study live in the Bering, Chukchi, and Beaufort Seas. And here we are in Seattle. So we have to go up to where they live so we can study them. Because so the field work that we conduct with these animals is that we actually go up to their habitat and we try to capture the seals so we can work with them on ice floes, like having the seal right there in front of us. And our field work is conducted in the Bering Sea because that's where we're able to capture the seals at this time of year when we go up there. So Erin also gave you some really good pictures from the cool aerial photos of their habitat, which you saw consists of a lot of water and a lot of ice. So I'll also be showing their habitat and their environment, but from a slightly different perspective when we go up there and study the seals from the ships and try to capture them. So again, what we see is a lot of water and a lot of ice. And when we go up to work with the seals in this environment, this is what we see for the entire time that we're up there. We don't see any land because at this time of year, the seals are out here on the ice edge. So for weeks on end, basically, this is what we see. And we're trying to find the seals in this habitat. And so here's some pictures of the seals in their habitat up here at the ice edge. This is a bearded seal way out here, and if you can see it on the ice floe. This is a bearded seal closer picture up. You can see all of his big whiskery beard. Here's a ribbon seal mom and her pup on the ice floe. And then this is a spotted seal who's in the water. And unfortunately, that's where we see most of the seals. And I just say unfortunately because the seals have to be on the ice floes for us to be able to capture them and work with them. Now, you remember where we were, so we're in Seattle. So to get up to the edge of the ice in the Bering Sea, we have to take a big ship. And this is an example of one of the ships that we've taken up to work with the animals in the Bering Sea. And as I said before, we don't see land the entire time that we're up there. So we live and work on this ship for the weeks at a time that we're working with the animals. Now, since our objective is to try to capture the seals, and the seals are hauled out on these little ice floes on the low on the water, you can see that it wouldn't really work to try to capture them from the big ship, because as soon as the big ship got anywhere near them, they would be scared and be spooked off of the ice into the water. So we use these smaller boats, they're little inflatable boats called Zodiacs, and we take these, we store them on the big ship, and then we launch them off the ship and take them out into the water and the ice to look for seals that we can capture. Now, one of the things that we have to deal with when we do field work is you have to deal with the conditions that the animals are living in, right? So one of the things I'm guessing you noticed about where we're working when we work with these seals is that it's cold out there. So you can see that everybody has got all the gear that they have to try and keep warm. You can see these guys both have goggles. Peter has this big, super fuzzy warm hat. Everybody has their faces covered because it's really cold. And you probably can't even recognize her, but this is Cynthia, all bundled up, ready to go out and search for seals in the cold. So we also have underneath the white suits that we're all wearing, which we use for camouflage, we're wearing dry suits. And dry suits will actually keep you dry if you go into the water, which if you're a scuba diver or if your parents are scuba divers, you might have heard of them. We also have safety equipment. So these black collar type things are actually life jackets. So, and if you go into the water, they will pop open and provide flotation. And everybody is carrying their own radio, their own personal radio. So like everyone in the small boats can talk to the other small boats so we can keep track of each other when we're out searching for seals. And all the small boats can also talk to the big ship so we can keep track. Okay, so now that we are suited up, ready for the cold, we hope, as best as we can, and we have all the safety gear on, now it is time to go look for the seals. So how do we look for the seals? I'm going to show a couple quick videos of how we look for seals. So in this video, this is basically what we do. This is one person's in the front of the boat, the small boats that I showed, and he's scanning, this is Sean, he's scanning the ice, looking for seals out on the ice floes. And we want to be able to spot them from really far away, because if we're too close, they'll spook into the water, and that's no good, right? Because we can't catch them in the water. So Sean is scanning way far out, hoping to find any seals hauled out on the ice. And as you can see, it takes a long time. Like, seals can be hidden behind these little tiny chunks of ice, and they'd be pretty easy to miss. So we spend most of our days searching like this. And you can see, even though I'm driving, I'm looking behind us to see if we've missed any seals. So we're looking from all angles. Okay, so that was one video, and that was an absolutely gorgeous, perfect day. So I'm going to show another video of what most of the days that we're out. Most of the days we're out there, it looks like this. Lots of fog, lots of wind, and lots of cold. So you can see why we need all of that weather, all that gear to try to keep us warm, and all of that safety gear so we can communicate with each other. And there's a boat, well, right up there. I don't know if you can see it. And we're actually coming up on the big ship, which is way in the fog here. So that's a more typical day. Now, so we've been searching for seals in the ice, and say we've spotted a seal. So Sean spotted a seal on an ice floe. Now the question is, how do we capture them? So I will show a couple quick videos of capturing the seals. It's how we capture on the ice. Since they're on the ice, we're in the small boats. What do we do? So here's Jeff in the front of the boat. He's in the front with a net. We're sneaking up on the seal, hiding behind the ice. Sneak up slowly, and then he jumps out on the ice, runs over, and puts the net on the seal. And that is how we ideally capture seals on the ice. So that was one quick video. I'll show you one more quick one. So this time I'm in the front of the boat with the net, but it's the same process, right? We're sneaking up slowly, trying to hide behind this ice, hoping the seal doesn't see us. This boat over here is actually distracting the seal from me, so I can run up to it, and put the net on top. So those are actually some very ideal. Those are ideal captures. That's how we all like it to go. Okay, so we've talked about where we go to capture seals and how we capture them. And I don't know if Lisa, is there time for questions?
We can take a couple of questions. Amanda was wondering whether your boots have spikes on them to prevent slipping on the ice.
Oh, good question. Actually, they don't. We wear, I don't know if you've heard of Sorels. Usually we either wear Sorels or bunny boots, but yeah, they don't have spikes, so there is a lot of slipping. There's often slipping.
And then Erin was wondering, are you taught how to grab a seal with your net, or how do you learn how to do that?
You're taught by other people who've done it before, so and you generally watch before you try it yourself. So you learn by observing and teaching that way, experience.
And then Hudson was wondering, how long are your teams on the boats when you're looking for seals?
On the small boats, we usually, on the small boats, it depends. If we're having a really good day, we could be out there, like 8 to 9 hours. If we're not having a very good day, not finding anything, and the weather gets bad, then it's just, we could be out just for a couple hours. So it really depends on if we're finding seals and how the weather is. We have restrictions. Yeah, sorry.
Jamie was wondering whether you capture large bearded seals that way too.
That's a really good question, and you must know bearded seals, Jamie, because we do not capture bearded seals that way. We actually capture bearded seals using nets in the water. So this is one way we catch spotted and ribbon seals, but bearded seals we actually do catch in the water with nets that are tangle nets, so they're like hanging in the water.
And then I know that you might be getting into this in the next section, but Ola and Carol were wondering, what do you do after you capture them? Do you tag them, or what kind of data are collected? And so maybe that would be a good way to get into our next section. That is a perfect way to get into our next section, actually, because my next question is, what do we do when we capture seals? So good question.
So the first things that we do are we weigh them and we measure them. So this contraption here, this is called a bipod, and this is the scale, and here's the seal in a sling. So we can use the bipod to lift the seal so that it's dangling from the scale, and we can get the weight. And we also take measurements. So this is Sean and John taking a length measurement, which is self-explanatory, the length of the seal. And then there's Sean and John also taking girth measurements, and we take girth measurements at different points on the body. And a girth measurement is like you're measuring around your waist or something. So after we weigh and measure, then one of the things that we do when we have them is we do satellite tagging, like you said. We attach satellite tags. And satellite tags are tags that we attach to the seal, and then they collect information from the seal. And then that information can be sent up to a satellite in the atmosphere. And then we can be at our desks in Seattle and computers and download that information so we can learn about what the seals are doing in the Bering, Chukchi, and Beaufort Seas while we're in Seattle. So these are two types of tags that our program uses to attach to the seals. And you can see this type of tag here, we actually use a type of glue, and we glue the tag to either the head or the back of the fur. And then this type of tag, we attach it to the webbing in the rear flipper. And it's actually like attaching an earring. So we poke little holes in the flipper and attach the tag so that it stays with the seal. And so you can see from these pictures that these are the antennas on the tags. And what happens is when these antennas come out of the water, that's when they send the information that the tag has been collecting here. That's when they send all that information to the satellites. So you can see it's great. What we really like is if we can get a tag on the head, because every time the seals pop their head out of the water, which you've probably seen, seals just pop their heads out only. Every time they do that, the information is sent to the satellites. For this type of tag on the flipper, the seal pretty much has to be hauled out on the ice like they are when we capture them to be able to send its information. But they're both great. They collect slightly different bits of information, so it's great to have them both. And these are some pictures of seals that we've tagged. This is a male ribbon seal with a flipper tag. Here's a female ribbon seal that we were able to get a tag on her head. And this is a mom, a female spotted seal, and her pup. And we actually captured both of the animals, but we didn't put a tag on the pup because it's too small. But we were able to put both a head tag, a tag on her head, and a tag in her flipper. And that is that's the best case scenario for us because, like I said, they collect different types of information, so we can get a lot of information from that one animal if we can get two tags on them. And now that leads me to a question, which if we have time, or I can just keep going, Lisa. But
yeah, I think probably we should keep going. We've got about 12 minutes left.
Oh, okay. So what kind of information can we get from the tags? So we can find out where seals go. So when the tags come out of the water, they send a location to the satellite. And from those locations over time, we can get tracks that the animals make. So we can find out where they go. So these are tracks from bearded seals. These are tracks from ribbon seals, and these are tracks from spotted seals. And you can see that we can find out that the different species move in very different ways, different manners. So bearded seals kind of stick by the coast. Ribbon seals are all over the Bering Sea and into the North Pacific, Gulf of Alaska, and spotted seals are also all over the Bering Sea, but maybe not quite as extensive as the ribbon seals. So the tags also collect information like how deep the seals dive, how long they're diving, and when they're diving. And we can use all of this information, where they go, how they're diving, with information that we get from another thing that we do when we have the seals in front of us on the ice. And that is that we collect biological samples. So one of the types of samples that we collect is blood. And we can learn a lot about the seals from their blood. We can test them for different types of diseases. We can see if they're dehydrated. I don't know, probably many of you have had blood taken when you're at the doctor's. And we can use those same tests that the doctors use on your blood on the seal blood to see how healthy the seals are. Another thing that we take are nasal swabs. And so I know everybody knows what COVID is. And these nasal swabs that we use to test the seals for diseases are the exact same nasal swabs that are being used to test people for COVID. And it's the same process too. Like you can see right here, here's Erin ready to stick a nasal swab up this little seal's nose to swab it around, and then we'll send that swab to the lab and it will be tested to see if that seal has any diseases. So just the same process and the same swabs as testing humans for COVID. We also collect skin snips, and from skin snips we can test them and get genetic information. So we can find out, for example, how closely seals are related to each other, and that helps us learn and know how to manage the populations. We also collect hair samples. And we can test the hair for a variety of different things, but one of the things that we test for is mercury content. And I don't know if you've heard of mercury in fish, but it's a poison. So, and it's a problem in fish also, and seals eat fish. So we're testing the seals to see if they have any kind of sickness from the mercury. We also collect scat or poop. And so here's Josh looking super happy that he's collecting a giant pile of poop. And so we collect any poop that we find in the ice and any poop that the seals leave us when we capture them, which is most of the time. So we put it in these plastic bags, freeze it, take it back to the lab in Seattle, and then in the lab we wash away all the poopy stuff and we keep what's left, which is the hard parts from the prey that the seals have eaten. So like fish bones and fish otoliths. And from those bones and otoliths, the otoliths are ear bones from the fish, we can actually identify the prey species that the fish are eating, or the fish that the seals are eating. And so we can combine that information with where the seals are going from the tagging data and how deep they're diving to learn a lot about the seal's biology and ecology. Oh, one other thing that we collect is we can figure out how thick their blubber is. So this is an ultrasound machine, and we actually can take this out in the field and find out exact thickness of their blubber layer. And blubber layer is super important to these seals because, well, so you saw the environment where they are and everything that we humans had to do to try and keep warm and to try and be able to work in that environment. So for the seals living in this environment, the only way that they keep warm is this blubber layer. So a thick blubber layer means they're in really good condition, they're finding a lot of food, so they're good and healthy. So what we can do is measure blubber layer over time and check on the seal's condition and health. Then here's just some pictures of us working in the field out on the ice. We're doing ultrasound on an adult spotted seal on the ice. I'm doing ultrasound on a spotted pup here. And then the other pictures really just show us all working out there. And they show how many people and how much resources and all this equipment. Look at all the stuff we have to take. So it shows how much effort it takes to get up there and work with the seals in their environment. But the information that we can get from having a seal in front of us on the ice, like putting the tags out and taking the samples, which is the only way to do it is if we have the seal, all of that information is extremely, extremely valuable. So at the end of sampling, when we're done taking samples and tagging, the seal goes back to the wild. We release the seal. And so here's several release pictures. Some of them have tags. This guy's really super excited to escape and get away. And I'm also going to show one more quick video of Jansen, our coworker John Jansen, releasing a ribbon seal. And the ribbon seal release is super interesting because they move in such an interesting way. So you can hear the wind in the background, and John is taking the towel away from its eyes. He's about to release it. We put the towel over to keep them calm while we have them. So see how they slither like a snake? That's a really unusual way for a seal to move across the ice. If you've seen harbor seals move on land or ice, they don't move like that, do they? So they're usually pretty excited to get away from us. But she didn't go right into the water right away. She just kind of stopped there and was like, what just happened? Okay. Now, so those were that was just a quick summary of what we do when we've got capture a seal and we are working with it on the ice in their habitat. And that is it. So thanks for listening, everybody. And Erin and Cynthia and I are here if you guys have more questions.
So Heather, we had a couple of questions from like Alden was worried about the experience for this for the seals and was wondering how stressful is the process for them. And there were a couple of other people who were wondering also how stressful it was for the seal.
It's definitely stressful. I mean, it's like we've come out of nowhere and they don't know what's going on. But we put dark towels that was over their eyes, and that keeps them calm. And we work really quickly, so we get them done as fast as we can. And we work really quiet, and so we move quietly and just try to be very quiet and calm when we're around the seals.
And then Michelle was wondering, how many seals have you caught?
Our program, and so we started this sort of capture work in 2006, I believe. So we've caught over 100 ribbon seals, probably close to that spotted seals, and way fewer bearded seals. I think we've only captured like in the tens of bearded seals. They're harder.
I remember that Cynthia was saying that they are 7 to 8 feet long, so they're longer than a bicycle and about as heavy as 8 big dogs. So I can imagine that they would be more difficult to capture.
Yeah, they're also really elusive. They're very wary of humans.
We also got a question about the ice. Michelle was wondering, or actually Tatiana was asking, how do you test if the ice you land on is stable? How do you choose the ice flows?
Oh, well, it's usually pretty clear when you come up to them on the boat, if it's going to be stable or not. So we don't get off on any of the really small bits of ice. Like that one bearded seal that was on the really small piece of ice, we probably would not have gotten off onto that one.
And then finally, I know we're just about at the end of our time, but we had several questions about climate change and how climate change is affecting the seals that you study. And I was wondering whether you could just give a quick overview.
Well, I mean, conditions are definitely changing up there. And we can tell you from the field work that we've done. So like I said, we started going up there in 2006, 2007. And for most of those years through 2016, we captured mostly ribbon seals because the ice was much farther south. And that's the habitat where the ribbon seals hang out. That's where we find them. But when we went up in 2018, there was so little ice in the Bering that year that we had to go really, really far north to find ice, and then to be able to find seals, because we need ice to be able to capture the seals. And we didn't see any ribbon seals because the ice was so far north. So that's just a quick sort of personal example of changes that we've seen in about 12 years.
And then we also had one more question about whether you work with the communities up in Alaska to do this work.
Yeah, that's a really great question. And so I didn't really talk about it too much, but we have done projects where we capturing bearded seals, like some people were talking about how difficult it is. So we worked with communities to get their help to learn how to capture bearded seals, because we don't live up there and we don't work with them as much. So we've worked with them in Wainwright and Utqiagvik, and Kotzebue to capture bearded seals.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I think we've come to the end of our time, but thank you so much, Erin and Heather and Cynthia, for all of your time and effort in putting this presentation together. I think we all learned a lot about ice-associated seals, and also thank you to Freya, our collaborating dog, for the thermal camera, and thanks to all of our audience members for tuning in. We got a lot of questions that we couldn't have the time to answer, so I might send you some questions and see whether we can post some of these answers online.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks,
send us some questions, and thanks everyone for tuning in.
All right. Thanks, everybody, and hopefully we'll see you next week. We'll be talking about otoliths, which are ear stones in fish, and what we use them for. So thanks a lot, everybody.